Well, hopefully everyone can see me and hear me. This webinar is going to be about connecting to support during COVID. My name is Kat Fillmore, and I'm a licensed professional clinical counselor at Counseling and Psychological Services at San Jose State University. My role as a counselor faculty member is to provide both personal counseling and case management through our center. So today I'm going to talk about three different areas. The first is COVID through the lens of grief and loss. The second is coping through COVID. And the third is CAPS in the time of COVID. And we'll talk about how we can go about connecting you to any needed resources. So first, COVID through the lens of grief and loss. And so there's a lot of work already being done in the field of psychology around what's happening in this very unique, unprecedented time. And a psychologist out of Columbia University said it's okay to feel grief over what we're losing. The reality is so often we associate grief or loss with things like death, that sometimes we don't allow ourselves to feel and experience grief when we're experiencing something outside of death. And of course, right now with COVID, there is some grief and loss around death that's happening for a lot of families in America. But for some of us who maybe aren't experiencing that, it can be easy to dismiss or try to ignore some of the sadness we're experiencing. But the truth is we're still experiencing immense losses, loss of the normal, loss of our sense of identity if we're losing work, loss of experiences we were really looking forward to. So what I want to highlight here is that grief is very, very normal. It's a normal human process. It happens for all of us. But the truth is, as normal as grief is, resilience is equally normal. So throughout this presentation, I really want to give you permission to mourn, to grieve, to experience that loss, and to learn a little bit about what that might look like, while also instilling that hope of resilience. So we'll start off by talking a bit about grief. So first things to note is that grief is different from everyone. So for all of you that are coming back from study abroad experiences, you had vastly different experiences depending on where you were and what you were going through. But the reality is, even if you had the same exact experience or a very similar experience, that doesn't mean that you're all going to experience it in the same exact way. The truth is, while you might see one of your peers who seems like they're moving on with life and doing really well, while you yourself are questioning a lot and feeling really down, that's okay. That's normal. This is going to happen at different paces and with different processes for everybody. So it's so important to remember that wherever you're at, that's okay. It's going to look differently for you than it might look for a peer. The other thing to remember is that grief is not linear. One of the original kind of viewpoints on grief was developed in stages. It was called the Stages of Grief by Kubler-Ross, and a lot of people are really familiar with it. And it's not that it's not helpful, right? But it had some attitudes around grief that made it seem like you had to go through very specific stages, and the stages happen in a very specific order. What we know now is that's not necessarily the case. That because grief looks so different for everybody, you're not necessarily going to move through specific stages at specific times with a specific timeline. We don't know how that's going to look, and we can't necessarily predict it. We can normalize things that tend to be trends or tend to be normal. And you'll also see that in grief groups or when people who are grieving come together, that they have shared experiences. But simply because you haven't had a specific experience or because it took you a little bit longer to have that experience doesn't mean that you're grieving wrong or incorrectly. The other thing to note is grief is useful. A lot of times in our culture today, we're trying to push away a lot of those uncomfortable emotions that we sometimes consider negative or bad emotions. And a big one of those is sadness. And people don't usually enjoy feeling sad. But the truth of the matter is experiencing grief is actually very, very healthy. And experiencing that sadness that comes with grief is also going to be part of what allows you to move on through the process. So it's not something to be pushed away, but instead something to be acknowledged and accepted and embraced. It comes in and out in waves. So you might even be noticing yourself feeling really great on one day and laughing and being excited and connecting with loved ones. And then the next day feeling really down and sad. Just know that that's normal. You don't have to feel guilty for being happy any more than you have to feel guilty for being sad. We find once again that grief is not linear. So the experience can come through these waves that might be connected to experiences. So maybe the grief comes up around the time that you were supposed to be coming home from your study abroad trip. Or maybe the grief comes up a year from now, where you're thinking about where you were supposed to be if things hadn't gone the way they did. And that's okay. Once again, it's really keeping in mind that grief isn't necessarily a permanent or constant state of being. It's more something that we have to take as it comes. And grief is relevant to really any kind of loss. So for some of you, you might be in the unhelpful habit of comparing your suffering or your sorrow, and that's not particularly helpful. Grief can come from, like I mentioned before, death and loss in that terminology. But like I said, for those of us who are losing jobs, missing bridal showers or weddings, baby showers, maybe missing the birth of family members, missing out on experiences we were supposed to have, missing out on graduations. All of these things are really big losses, and grief still applies. And grief was not meant to be managed alone. We're people who are meant to always be in community and through connection. So when we grieve, it's really helpful to reach out. This is a perfect opportunity with people who are working in the office with students who have experienced study abroad in this context. Reach out to other people who've experienced it, check in with them, see where you might have common ground and commonalities. Reach out to the support services through SJSU. Talk with friends and family, maybe who don't understand the experience exactly from your lens, but still can provide empathy. All these points of connection are really helpful when it comes to grief. Moving along, let's talk about how do we cope with that grief now that we understand it. Now that we have a handle on what that might look like, what do we do next? I really like this quote that came from American Psychological Association from an article they did on building resilience. It says, like building a muscle, increasing your resilience takes time and intentionality. No one just automatically knows how to cope. Even the healthiest people that you know are working at being healthy. It's something we have to work at every day, all the time. And so particularly in this strange time of COVID, potentially when you're grieving the loss of your study abroad experience or your graduation or just your sense of normalcy, we have to work especially hard in building that resilience through coping. It's going to take time and it's going to take energy. But here are some suggestions of ways to look at it. The first is being really cautious with how you're consuming media. The truth is, not everything that's being pushed out right now is super helpful. So it's really important that we're looking at only reliable sources. I know that fortunately most of us understand by now, not everything we read on the internet is true. But even being really cautious when someone we trust posts something on Facebook, not just automatically sharing it or automatically taking that in as the truth, but maybe checking out what source it's coming from, or we could find that information backed up by another source. We also want to be very cautious about excessive exposure. For some of us, it might be easy to finish up our school day or our work day and just hop straight online, or get right on our TV to watch the news or start scrolling through articles. All of these things can be good in moderation to help us be aware of what's going on in our world, but we do have to be very, very cautious that we're not letting that take up every single ounce of our mental space and energy. Maybe we find that we can really only handle 20 minutes of that on a given day, and that's okay. It's okay to set those limits and really note that even if someone else can handle a lot of media without it impacting them, that's not necessarily going to be the case for you. So monitor your use and your mood when you're scrolling. For some of us, scrolling through Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or whatever it might be, Snapchat, is something that you consider to be relaxing or your main source of recreation. It might be worth you starting to take kind of a mood temperature of how you're actually feeling when you're doing these things. If you're finding that when you're scrolling through your friends' stories on Instagram, that you're actually having a sense of discontentment or jealousy or sadness or disappointment welling up in you as you're seeing the way other people might be living that might look differently from where you're at right now, then maybe you know it's time to limit some of those things more. Maybe it's important for you to notice who you're following right now and what kind of news outlets you're looking at. Maybe you notice when you're looking at particular kinds of content, your mood is shifting in really unhelpful ways. So maybe you shift that content to more positive, supportive content. And then be really careful about comparison. Right now, the whole entire world is grieving. A lot of the country is grieving. And so even when you might see that other people seem to be having more fun than you're having, or that they're connecting in more meaningful ways, just remember that everything that is reflected on social media is not necessarily the case. So even if someone's life looks like they're thriving and they're connecting, that might not actually be how they feel inside. So it's really important to remember this statement. I can control how much news and social media I consume. Right now, there's a lot of things that are outside of our control, but this is something that's very much in our control that we can make sure we're getting a handle of. The next thing to keep in mind is that connection is so important, like I mentioned before. There's a lot of different ways to connect right now, even though a time like this can be so very isolating. So here's a few suggestions of things to think about. First of all, recognize that a lot of us don't have a ton going on in our life right now. So maybe now is a time you can catch up with people where your busy schedule sometimes makes it difficult to connect. Now is a great time to call, FaceTime, WhatsApp, text, message, Zoom, any kind of chat you can think of with family and friends all over the globe, right? Just know that because someone doesn't answer or respond right away doesn't necessarily mean that they don't care about you or that they're not interested in connecting. Recognizing that we're all going through our own battle and experience right now is important. But I know there's people out there who'd be more than willing to connect if we're willing to reach out. Another big one is make contact with our success centers on campus. The truth is, a lot of the success centers have been running standing Zoom meetings where anyone can kind of hop in and chat. I know that over the semester, CAPS has still been running its Let's Talk program outside of a lot of the centers and areas on campus where students can still pop in. Some of that will be slowing down a little bit over the summer, but the truth is a lot of those opportunities are still out there. So maybe you hadn't had a chance to walk into the Chicanx Latinx Student Success Center, and this could be a great time to check it out through those Zoom opportunities. Another option is to safely volunteer. I want to be cautious with this. I understand that some of you might be immunocompromised or live with someone elderly or dealing with a lot of ailments and sickness. So this suggestion isn't for everybody. But for instance, Second Harvest Food Bank is a great resource that we partner with through our SJSU Cares and Pantry program. And they've needed a lot of volunteers in this time where food insecurity is really being heightened for some people in the Bay. So sometimes when we're feeling really disconnected, a great way to feel connected can be to give back. There might be a lot more other volunteer opportunities that you're aware of as well. just try to keep in mind that it might be a good idea to volunteer with agencies that seem like they're keeping their volunteers' safety at the forefront. Reach out to warm lines. The truth is, California has a 24/7 warm line. Now, a lot of you have probably heard of crisis lines, which are really useful when we're already at their crisis point. Warm lines are really great resources that we can use before we reach that crisis point. There's one that's not 24/7 through Santa Clara County NAMI as well, but the 24/7 California line is a really great resource that you can use when you feel yourself maybe heading toward that crisis point, but you're not there yet, and having someone to talk to could be useful. Now is a great time to find affinity groups online is probably the safest option. But depending on your race and ethnicity, or your religion or spirituality, or any interests you might hold related to media or video games, hop on Discord. Figure out where there might be some safe forums where you could chat with people and build some different kinds of connections. Maybe you always wanted to try a meetup, and this could be a good time to figure out what that meetup group is doing to stay connected in this time of COVID. There's a lot of really innovative ways you can reach out. I've heard great stories of friends using things like Animal Crossing to really connect at this time. So recognize that there's a lot of different things that you can do or try. There's board games on phones that can be bought on the App Store, a lot of stuff that can be done by computer. So we can use technology to our advantage at this time to connect with people. Even snail mail is an option that I think most college students don't think of right now, but can still be pretty fun. Everyone likes getting mail. All right, so next it's important for us to talk about not skimping on the self-care. This is a huge part of coping. So often I'll hear students think of self-care as going to the spa or getting a massage, or doing something that might be very costly and expensive. It's really time we shift our idea of self-care away from these difficult to achieve and maintain things, and more to the things we can just do regularly on a daily basis. I've broken self-care down into a few different categories that I think can be really helpful to making them feel practical and manageable. So the first category is distraction. Sometimes if we've just been watching the news too long, or we already gave ourselves some time to journal and cry things out, what we really need is just a break. So give yourself that time to watch that fun movie on Netflix or that show, play a video game, do a puzzle, read a book. These are the times to just give our brain the chance to have fun, to relax, to just enjoy things for the sake of enjoying them. Another option is self-regulation. So there's a lot of mindfulness apps out there that vary in usefulness. You can find one that works for you, but a lot of them are offering their services for free in this time of COVID. But the truth is there's tons of free resources related to mindfulness meditations as well. You can find them on YouTube. There's a lot of different stuff you can find on Spotify. So just know that there are free resources out there for mindfulness meditation that can really help with regulating your anxiety. You can go for a run if you're feeling really angry or have a lot of pent-up energy, or take a soothing bubble bath. Things falling in the self-regulation category are really a way of us either managing our anxiety, our sadness, our anger, our excitement, right? Once again, it's not about pushing these things away. It's about finding healthy ways to cope with them. And also expression. So sometimes when distraction and self-regulation aren't proving themselves the most helpful, we have to ask ourselves the question, have I even really processed this yet? Have I processed it internally for myself, or have I expressed it to anyone? Maybe this isn't even something I've fully fleshed out. There's tons of research to show that working with a journal can be very, very, very helpful for anyone, but especially people experiencing grief, and especially people experiencing things like anxiety or depression. So because there's so much research on this, we know that it's helpful. Some of you are old school and you want to pull out that pretty journal with the pen. But the truth is, you could start a blog, you could write on your phone, you can type an email to yourself. A lot of people find things helpful to write it in terms of letters they'll never send. No matter how you decide journaling is good for you, it can be a great way to really check in with yourself and start to process through what your experience is. The greatest thing I think about journaling is we can go back and see how far we've come when we look back on our entries and reflect on them. And we can see that sometimes where we were at is definitely not where we're at anymore. And we can celebrate our growth through that. Engage in vulnerable conversation. Again, this connects to that piece with us needing other people. So maybe you're not the type to cry in front of other people or ask people for help, but this could be a great time to practice that. A lot of times people tell me, Kat, I'm not into writing. I don't want to pick up a journal, but people are more into writing songs or poetry or painting pictures or drawing or animating something. The truth is there's a lot of different ways that we can express ourselves through body movement and dance. We don't have to limit ourselves in this way. There's a lot of different forms of expression. A little bit more on self-care, take a break. And I really want to say this seriously. There's so many people I'm talking to right now in all different facets of my life who have completely blended the boundaries between work and school and home. So if you're one of those people who, when you check in with yourself seriously, realize there's not been a single day you've taken off since all this shelter in place stuff started, it really might be time for you to just start walling off a day that's a no work day. I understand that for some of you, financially, this might not be an option with you working multiple jobs. So sometimes it can't be a full day, although I would encourage it whenever it's financially possible. But at least figuring out maybe how you can wall off half a day or even a couple hours. Being mindful that while binging Netflix is great and can be helpful sometimes, it's not necessarily the most beneficial way to spend your whole entire break time. So maybe get outside, do some physical movement, do something creative, chat with that friend, but take some space where it's just completely a break, no work involved. Develop a routine that helps you take proper breaks. So once again, with that merging of your work and life balance, it can be really easy to wake up when you wake up and stop working whenever you stop working. For you to set a specific time when you're gonna wake up, start working, and when you're gonna finish your work can be helpful once again for setting those boundaries. Making sure you're scheduling a lunch break really gives you that chance to take a step back and relax and breathe and reflect. It's really important you're caring for your body right now. I'm hearing a lot of people talk about sleep schedules getting pretty messed up. It's not super helpful to start staying awake until 5 a.m. just because you can. It's probably a good idea to still frame things generally, once again, around a routine. Sleeping about 8 hours a day, engaging in some form of movement, eating healthy, regular meals. All of these things are really important for taking care of ourselves. Once again, I recognize that things like finances or safety in our homes can impact our ability to care for ourselves, but there's always something that we can do to support ourselves a little bit better in taking care of our bodies. And then finally, reflect on what's within your own control. Right now, with everything that's going on with COVID, there's a lot of things that are completely and totally outside of your control. Even the way in which you were brought back from study abroad was probably completely out of your control. But it's so important to keep this in mind. Even though there's so much that's outside of your control, there is a lot that is within your control. So it's important to really focus in on those things. It's within your control how much media you consume. It's within your control whether you allow yourself to mourn. It's in your control to really celebrate what you have achieved up to this point. For a lot of people who are experiencing graduation without the big ceremony, it might be easy to skate on by and not acknowledge that huge accomplishment. But it'd probably be a lot more helpful for someone to pause and reflect on the time and how far they've come and how many wonderful things that they've done and the goal that they've reached. And that's something within all of our control. So it's really important to recognize that while there's a lot of things going on in our lives right now that we don't want and we wouldn't desire, there's a lot of choices that we still have in the midst of that. So what are some warning signs maybe that you're not doing so well with coping, that you're feeling like you're getting stuck, that you're not sure what to do next? You're maybe thinking, as I was talking about grief, like, yeah, I'm experiencing that. And as I'm talking about the coping skills, yeah, I've tried that and it's not really working for me. Here are some warning signs that you might just need some support with coping. So the first is if you're feeling shock, numbness, or disbelief for an ongoing period of time. These are emotions that it's normal for all of us to feel in short amounts. But if you feel like you're just moving about life through a haze at this point, and you're not feeling much of anything and you're very disconnected from your experience, this could be an indication that you might need to talk it out with a professional and get some support. Any major changes in energy, sleep, or appetite. Once again, I recognize this is a tricky one because all of us are right now trying to balance our energy, sleep, and appetite a little bit differently with all these changes. But if you were a person who never had issues with sleeping and now you're having a hard time falling asleep almost every night, or let's say you mostly slept peacefully and now you're waking with nightmares, that could be an indication of a sleep change. When you're trying to fall asleep and you can't is different when you're intentionally keeping yourself awake, not trying to fall asleep with distractions. Or let's imagine you get a full 8 hours, you should be really rested, and you're just listless. You have no energy. Or let's say you normally have a healthy appetite and you just don't want to eat anything right now. This could be a sign that something else is going on. And it's really important that we listen to those physical indicators. If there's feelings of sadness, fear, anger, more often than not, once again, sadness, fear, anger, these are very normal emotions that we shouldn't be judging or shaming ourselves about feeling. But if you're finding yourself that you just feel sad basically all the time, or you're just always irritable and angry, then that can be an indication, once again, that you might need someone to speak with. That it's not just as simple as coming in and out of grief, that you might be going through a more complicated grief process that needs exploring. If you're finding yourself having just more bodily complaints, a lot of times people notice the physical symptoms of anxiety and depression and grief a lot sooner than they notice the psychological symptoms. So things like stomach aches daily, more consistent headaches, if you were dealing with any chronic conditions like Crohn's disease or any other autoimmune condition, and you're finding that you're having a lot of flare-ups and changes, this might be a time to recognize, what if there could be a physical component going on with this? Not just a physical component, rather a psychological component going on with this. And finally, this last piece of increased use of substances. I know that there's a lot of memes out there right now joking about 5 p.m. and happy hour and alcohol use. But the truth is, what happens in COVID doesn't stay in COVID. Unhealthy behaviors that we develop at this time could very much turn into problematic behaviors. So it's really important that we're monitoring our use of substances. And if we're noticing a serious spike and increase, it might be that we're trying to self-medicate, or we're using these substances to cope when it might be healthier to use other coping skills. So now let's talk about how you would get that help and support if you were to find yourself experiencing some of the things we saw in the last slide. I want to spend this last part of the presentation talking about CAPS and how to access resources through CAPS in this very strange time. Through the American Counseling Association, They referenced in terms of COVID, during times like this, counselors play a crucial role in sharing accurate public information and in helping clients maintain perspective while providing methods of coping and continuing their wellness strategies. Even if you were a person who prided yourself in being so well and so good at coping prior to COVID, the truth is, with everything that happens in our life, we sometimes have to recalibrate and shift. So maybe you've never needed counseling before, or maybe you've always been too scared to check out counseling, and now could actually be the perfect time as you ease back into a new normal. So our services are currently available remotely and will remain available throughout the summer, as we always are, and into the new fall school year. We have not gone anywhere. We are very much still here working with clients Monday through Friday, okay? So you can stay safe in your home and in your car, on a walk through your neighborhood, wherever it's best for you to have this session, and still meet with us in the same way that you would if we were all together on campus, just with the help of some technology. What's also exciting about this right now is that a lot of times in the summer, people who head home to San Diego or Humboldt usually weren't able to continue accessing the resources. But since we've gone remote, the truth is that anyone in any part of the state of California can continue to utilize our resources throughout the summer and into the fall, regardless of whether or not they're anywhere near campus. Here are several resources that you can access through CAPS. The first two are actually online resources. So maybe you're having more general concerns. Maybe it feels like you're going through more of a normal grief process and you don't necessarily need that support through counseling yet. Or maybe you're too nervous to check out counseling and want to check out a couple of online resources first. The first is called You at SJSU, and I have the link there, but it's fairly easy to find. If you jot that down, it's a really easy link. It gives a lot of just really general information on things like managing anger or anxiety or coping skills that you can use when you're sad, but it's really geared toward a higher education population, and it's a really easy interface to use with just a bunch of resources that quickly pop up based on areas of interest. Next is called TAO, or Therapist Assisted Online. It's a web-based interactive program through the CAPS website that's pretty easy to find and locate. If you even just Google SJSU TAO, you'll be able to locate it. In both You at SJSU and TAO, you will use your SJSU login information to be able to access the resources. With TAO, like I said, it's interactive, so you'll go through different modules based on what you're experiencing on a given time. If you're experiencing more anxiety, you could look for the modules that cover that. There's videos, quizzes, mindfulness meditations, and opportunities to track how you're feeling. If you're working with a therapist or a counselor through CAPS, that counselor can actually see what progress you've made and what modules you've done as well. We also offer educational counseling, which is a great entry point into CAPS. A lot of times people feel more comfortable talking about their academic stressors before they feel comfortable talking about their personal stressors. Educational counselors are great for things like talking about next steps for students on probation, or they can even continue to work with students who've already been disqualified and are trying to make their way back to the university. If you're experiencing things like test anxiety or math anxiety, just difficulty with time management, educational counselors are great for helping you build that set of skills you need to be educationally successful. And they work very closely with us as personal counselors as well. For personal counseling, a lot of times people are surprised to hear that we provide both individual and couples counseling. And so the truth is that any range of topics can be discussed in personal counseling, really nothing is off limits. So whether you want to talk about this experience of what's been going on in COVID or anything that it's brought up for you, that's great. But you can also talk about anything and everything going on in your life, any past traumas or family challenges or anxiety you might feel about entering the workforce someday. All of those things can be useful to process and explore there. We also offer case management. Case management is working with an individual who's really specialized in knowing how to get you connected to resources in the community. Sometimes the counselors or the students who come into CAPS discover that that student needs more than CAPS can provide. Maybe they want weekly sessions or even a more intense treatment regimen. Then a case manager can help to figure out that person's insurance if they have it, help them get linked to potential insurance if they don't have it, and figure out the best possible next steps and resources, both on and off campus for that student. Sometimes it can be overwhelming to make those phone calls yourself if you don't fully understand insurance, so working with a case manager can be super helpful. Finally, there's crisis intervention. So the reality is anytime that CAPS is open, which during the summer hours is going to be 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., students can call the CAPS phone number, the front desk phone number, and be connected with a crisis counselor. And we'll have those sessions over the phone. So even though those used to be walk-in before, we're still having them, it's just with a different format. Additionally, even when we're not open, we contract with a company that provides crisis resources to our students around the clock. So you can really use that CAPS front desk number anytime that you're feeling that you need to connect to a crisis counselor. For those of you with your new SJSU ID tower cards, the newer ones from this year actually have some crisis information on the back. So you can always check out those phone numbers as well. So what do we provide in CAPS? We provide completely free brief therapy to any and all matriculated students. A lot of our students will say, well, I thought it cost something to go in. It is totally free. We do not accept any money. It's already included in your student health fees. So there's no reason why you would have to feel that cost is going to be something that's going to prevent you from getting support. When I say all matriculated students, what I mean is if your first semester is going to be in the fall, then you can't quite connect with us yet. Or if you graduate this May in a couple of days, you're not able to continue connecting with us. But anyone who goes to school in the spring and enrolls for the fall is eligible to work with us over the summer, even if they're not in summer courses. But of course, students in summer courses can work with us as well. We do provide a brief model with 8 sessions per year. So sometimes we're supporting students in figuring out what it is they want from counseling. And sometimes they want more than what can be provided through a brief model. And like I said, that's where the case management and support comes in with getting students connected to the correct resources. So it's so easy to connect to CAPS. And so I want to just affirm the ease by walking you through the process. The first thing, you're just going to call our CAPS front desk number. It's 408-924-5910. We have transitioned the phone system completely over to be conducted remotely. So you're still going to reach our friendly front desk staff when you call when CAPS is open. So if you call during business hours, you'll get set up and they'll be able to work with you. It's very important that you're responding to emails or phone calls, especially right now with things going on. There's a lot we're doing through emails and phone calls to make sure you're able to fill out the correct paperwork and all of that. So it's really making sure you're watching for those CAPS emails and any potential CAPS phone calls you might be receiving to make sure that everything goes smoothly with scheduling your appointment and filling out all the paperwork. And then all you have to do is show up. If you've asked for a phone call, then the CAPS counselor will reach out to you at that time. If you prefer Zoom, you're going to be sent a Zoom invite, and all you have to do is click the link and show up. It's a really, really easy process. So hopefully difficulty isn't going to be a deterrent for anybody. So here are some of my references. And I wanted to give you all an opportunity to ask any questions you might have that came up for you about how to access the resources or any additional resources you think might be helpful. But if you think of anything after this webinar, you can always reach me at kat.fillmore@sjsu.edu. Of course, also calling that CAPS phone number or emailing our front desk as well. So I guess we'll open it up to any questions at this point.
Just want to make sure if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. And if you don't, that's fine too. Because we have a limited number of participants, I'll put that out there that if you want to do a follow-up Zoom, if you ever want to talk to anybody, we're also here all the time. I keep joking that we're a captive audience. And I know that I've been talking to you throughout the semester. So if at any point you just want to talk about anything, we are also here to support you in that. And you can always reach out. I try to be available at any point and very quickly for our students. So we are here for you. That continues on no matter what. And then just want to keep putting that out there that if you need anything, you can always reach out to CAPS or the Study Abroad and Away team. We're available. And then also don't forget that we've got our website, which we've added some new features to it for the spring students. Kat, we built a website for our students called the Spring Sequester. Feel free to go reference it. If we will get the PowerPoint and we can link it in there as well for students who weren't able to attend today so that they can also go through this. We'll also try to link the video out so you can watch it from there as well. I have to tell you, I have not done my job in adding new updated distraction guides. So I need to update, in fact, the whole team needs to update our Netflix and Hulu suggestions for you. There's a whole bunch of information on self-care. One thing Kat mentioned is that, going to a spa and getting a massage. I will say this, that one of my first pandemic purchases was a shoulder massager from Amazon. It is not the same, but it is doing all the things that I need it to do because I carry stress in my shoulders. I know this about myself. So sometimes you just have to splurge and figure out how it makes you feel better. Other than that, thank you so much, Kat, for joining us and doing this incredible presentation.
Yeah,
so
thank you
much.
for letting me join y'all. It was nice to meet you.